Jon Kent, Superboy, goes on a summer trip with his grandfather, Mr. Oz. He came back 7 years older, but he wasn't aged up in a matter of moments. Jon Kent lived 7 years imprisoned in a different universe, but eventually he found his way home. Where was his protector, Mr. Oz? And is Bendis ruining Superman? Or is he a genius? Well, let's talk about it. Oh, and make sure you stay to the end where we discuss how the crime syndicate is involved and how do they even survive Darkseid War. Mr. Oz was a huge mystery and kept Superman's audience at the edge of their seat as to who he is and why he has such a strong interest in Clark Kent's Superman, or rather, the pre-Flashpoint Superman. He made his first appearance in DC Rebirth, where the OG pre-Flashpoint Wally West returns to warn everyone in this new timeline that a malevolent entity is messing with the timeline and stole 10 years from everyone, effectively making our heroes 10 years younger. The Legion of Superheroes, Saturn Girl, makes her first appearance for the first time in the New 52. Johnny Thunder returns. Ray Palmer is trapped somewhere but brings dire warnings for the future of the DCU, and Pandora gets blasted and killed by a blue energy. This is the same comic book that shows Batman finding the comedian's pin from the Watchmen universe in his Batcave. This is where we see Mr. Oz for the first time, and he tells Clark that he isn't a friend or foe. His name is Mr. Oz, and that Clark and his family are not what they believe they are, and neither was the fallen Superman. Mr. Oz is of course referring to the New 52 Superman who died fighting an imposter. In Action Comics, The Oz Effect, we finally get an answer as to who Mr. Oz is and what his intentions are and why he showed up in the DCU. Unfortunately, with any epic reveal, we are often left with new questions, but the story is pushed further. Alright, let's get into The Oz Effect. Mr. Oz first begins with meeting an imprisoned Superman villain, Metallo. Mr. Oz is disgusted with how humans torture their prisoner, and his version of setting Metallo free is to basically remove the kryptonite rock which powers the villain's entire existence. Metallo dies, and Mr. Oz goes on to point out the extent of human cruelty from every corner of the earth, further stating that this planet doesn't deserve Superman. Mr. Oz has the ability to see the heinous actions of people around the world, from mass job cuts to drinking and boating, to kids working in sweatshops, poaching, and even countries going through civil war where soldiers meant to protect their people are going around killing them. Superman jumps into action, but he isn't enough to stop everything at once. The Justice League are all busy, and he is being pushed to the brink. Even Superman notices that the world seems to be imploding on itself all at once. This is when Mr. Oz finally reveals himself. This is also their second encounter ever. In a blink of an eye, Mr. Oz manages to teleport them both to Superman's fortress. You see, this is not the first time Mr. Oz has been here. A few weeks ago, during an attack from the Eradicator, General Zod, Cyborg Superman, Metallo, and Mongol, basically most of Superman's worst nightmares, while the other villains had their hands full. Zod attacks the fortress, but Jon manages to jump inside a Kryptonian battle armor designed for war. Jon doesn't know how to navigate it, but Jor-El speaks to Jon Kent and instructs him on how to use it in order to stall Zod till help arrived. Alrighty, back to the scene of the fortress. Mr. Oz barely wastes any time and removes his cloak, revealing that he is in fact Jor-El, the father of Kal-El himself and the biological grandfather to Superboy Jon Kent. But claiming to be Superman's father doesn't hold any weight. The first sign of Mr. Oz's honesty was when Superman commanded his butler robot Kelex to do something. Instead of carrying out the task, Kelex follows the orders from Mr. Oz instead, due to the fact that Superman is Kelex's second master. His master and creator is Jor-El, aka Mr. Oz. So how did Jor-El survive Krypton's destruction? Well, shortly before Krypton exploded and Kal-El's ship was racing to Earth, Jor-El made peace with death as Krypton exploded around him. Jor-El was being torn apart alongside his wife Laura, but a blue energy engulfed him and sent him to Earth. This is the same blue energy consistent with Dr. Manhattan and his meddling of time. This explains Jor-El's damaged look and him losing an eye. He was saved while his body was being torn apart by the explosions around him, which means he has a piece of kryptonite lodged inside one of his eyes. We know what radioactive kryptonite does to Kryptonians, so how is Jor-El managing to breathe, much less walk, with a piece of kryptonite in his brain? That we'll discuss a bit later. Jor-El landed on Earth in a third world nation and being torn apart by civil war. He witnesses a boy gun down his own family over stolen rations. Jor-El doesn't know why he was sent to Earth, but he is starting to think that he is here to witness mankind's aptitude for cruelty and her capacity for evil. Jor-El gets transported again and now trapped in a chair and forced to watch humankind's history of cruelty. Sometime later, Jor-El became Mr. Oz. Mr. Oz has his own safe house in a pocket dimension. He believes that he is here to witness mankind's capacity for cruelty, so he removes certain individuals and entities like they are chess pieces. He took Doomsday, a future version of Tim Drake, aka Batman, the present-day Tim Drake. He kills Metallo, and somehow he is strong enough to lock up the all-powerful fifth-dimensional imp, Mr. Mxyzptlk. The imp is immensely powerful, but to give you an idea of Mr. Oz's capabilities, after the imp escapes, he went into hiding by casting a spell which made him believe that he is a normal Clark Kent in order to stay free from Mr. Oz. Now, Mr. Oz became a divine person to radicals and extremists. These people believe that Mr. Oz is basically a Jesus-like figure and Judgment Day is coming, with his branding on them. These radicals believe in him so much that they are willing to give their lives for him because the select few will be chosen to survive the end of all things. Mr. Oz isn't lying about this part, and even Superman notices this. The difference between Mr. Oz and the other villains Superman had faced is the fact that after a while, even the other villains don't believe in what they're saying. And yet Mr. Oz's conviction is steadfast, and he keeps telling Clark that there is a powerful entity out there set to destroy Earth, the same entity that gave Mr. Oz his powers. Earth is still on fire, so Superman left to save civilians against a missile strike while Mr. Oz arrives on the Daily Planet to take out one of his followers in order to save Lois Lane. This is also when Jor-El finally reveals himself to Jon Kent Superboy for the first time and shows him a glimpse at his future donning a version of Superman's red and blue suit, but customized for Jon. This is the second time we see a future version of Jon in the Bendis Superboy suit, so aging Jon Kent Superboy of 7 years has been in the works for a long time, even before Bendis started working on Superman. Okay, so Mr. Oz offers Jon Kent to be relocated to a world where he doesn't need to hide who he is and what he can do. At this point, Jor-El got Jon Kent convinced, but when Clark arrives, he engages Mr. Oz and breaks the staff that Jor-El had been carrying around with him. This releases Jor-El from a trance, but the staff was the only thing relieving his brain from the pain of having a kryptonite lodged in his skull. Jor-El's mentality switches 180 and he acts more like a father figure. When Superman came close, Jor-El warns him to stay away due to the kryptonite in his skull, whereas moments ago, he used that kryptonite to offensively blast his own son. Jor-El got pulled by the same blue light, but not before telling his son that he loves him. Following the ending of the Oz Effect, Superman travels to Oa, home of the Intergalactic Policing Corps known as the Green Lanterns. He gets approved to see the recordings of the moment Krypton was destroyed, and right after his ship leaves the dying world. The footage gets corrupted, hinting that Dr. Manhattan is powerful enough to bypass and corrupt files inside and amongst the Green Lantern Corps. The next time we follow up with the family is with Brian Michael Bendis' run on Superman the Man of Steel, a 6-part series that introduces a new villain whom is revealed to be the reason behind Krypton's death, but that's a story for another day. Without a reason as to what happened to him after the Blue Portal incident, Jor-El returns to Earth without the staff that kept his kryptonite lodged in his brain at bay. At this juncture, Jor-El isn't interested in his son, but rather his grandson, Jon Kent. Jor-El admits that Superman is a beacon of hope, and if he leaves, Earth will suffer the changes. But Jon Kent is still young and growing. Jor-El is concerned that this world can't give him what he needs to grow properly, and his father, who was raised on Earth, isn't equipped to properly raise a Kryptonian human hybrid son. Jon is intent on leaving with his grandfather for 3 main reasons. 1, he was rejected by Damian Wayne's Teen Titans following the events of Supersons of Tomorrow. He fears turning evil and killing millions, which happened in a possible future confirmed by Raven, and he will forever live in Superman's shadow if he doesn't take this opportunity to learn more about himself with his grandfather's help. Superman is not okay with this at all, but Lois decides to tag along with Jor-El and Jon Kent in hopes of documenting a trip for her new book. Still, Superman says no, but Jor-El gives Clark a long-range communicator that he can stay in touch with his family anytime he wants. Jor-El promises that no harm will come to them and he will bring them back. This concludes Bendis' Man of Steel 6-part series, so now we jump into Bendis' Superman series, where Superman has to deal with the fact that his long-range communicator got destroyed during his battle with Krypton's destroyer, Rogal Zaar. His Arctic fortress is also gone, so without mentioning his Himalayan fortress, Superman recreates a new fortress at the center of the Bermuda Triangle. Following the Unity event where Superman and Rogal Zaar goes for round 2, General Zod gets involved, resulting in the villains getting trapped in the Phantom Zone and Superman returning as Earth's protector once again. At the end, Superboy Jon Kent emerges 7 years older. He was not rapidly aged up in that few weeks that Superman last saw him leave with Jor-El and Lois. No, Jon lived nearly 7 years as a prisoner before he found his way home. Hey guys, Joey here. Thanks for sticking around this long, and a quick shout out to the Patreons that made this video happen. Now, if you want to throw in your suggestions for a video topic, click the Patreon link and find out how. Okay, back to the video. So what the hell happened to the sweet 10-year-old Jon Kent Superboy since we last saw him? Let's take a ride back to the moment Jon Kent Superboy and Lois Lane left with Jor-El on his ship. The small ship took Jon Kent Superboy, mom and grandfather to the actual ship that Jor-El had been using. No explanation as to what happened to Jor-El after he was taken by Manhattan, and the same goes for all this tech up to this point. But let's roll with it. For weeks, Jon Kent and Jor-El battled space aliens, freed slaves, and served their own version of justice in the galaxy while carrying around the House of El Sigil, which carries a lot of weight in the galaxy. Lois was gifted Superman's suit, which has the ability to shrink to the size of the person wearing it, as she was walking around the marketplace. The people regarded her as royalty due to Lois sporting the S sigil. This is of course a very respectful nod to Superman's heroic deeds in the galaxy. So back to Jor-El. Eventually, Lois sees the cracks and flaws in Superman's father and decides to pack up and go back to Earth without saying goodbye. Hashtag Mom of the Year award. Jon Kent stayed, but eventually even he saw Jor-El's insanity. But there is one part of Jor-El's insanity that makes perfect sense. He is a man of science, and he should not be alive and going on adventures with his grandson. And then there's Jonathan Samuel Kent, who, after retconning out the Convergence event, shouldn't be made possible. The night he was conceived should have killed Lois Lane, and then there's everything else that is wrong with Jon Kent being possible. We are talking about human Kryptonian DNA mixing without any external help, resulting in a perfectly healthy normal child whose powers, according to Batman, should surpass Superman's one day. Okay, back to the main story. During their travels in the galaxy, Jor-El's ship gets swallowed by a black hole. Grandfather and grandson get separated, and Jon Kent Superboy emerges on Earth 3, the home of Ultraman, Owlman, Johnny Quick, Superwoman, Deathstorm, and Power Ring. They are the crime syndicate, a twisted version of the Justice League, and Ultraman wears the face of Superman, Jon Kent's father. Side note guys, following the events of Darkseid War, the Anti-Monitor laid waste to this Earth. Nothing is left alive, and the crime syndicate found a way to prime Earth, aka Earth Zero, by traveling through Pandora's box. The events taking place here with Jon Kent Superboy is believed to happen before the Anti-Monitor arrived to this universe, due to the fact that the Syndicate are still here and that regular people are still alive and living out their lives. Well, that's not right. So DC addressed this issue in a recent Justice League Hell Arisen story arc. Arisen? Where the apex predator Lex Luthor brought the crime syndicate to meet Perpetua. The syndicate of course pledged their loyalty to the god, and this is where we see Lex Luthor say, "It's funny, I watched them die. Not all of them, but more than a few. Their Earth was destroyed. They came to ours, died. Come to think of it, I may have helped a few of them to their graves." Now, during Forever Evil, Johnny Quick got his neck broken by the Earth 3's version of Shazam. The same guy also killed Deathstorm. Power Ring was killed by Sinestro, and Lex Luthor squishes Atomica like a bug. During Darkseid War, Ultraman was killed by Mobius, Superwoman was killed by Grail, Cyborg managed to overwrite Grid, and at the very end, Owlman escapes with the Mobius chair, but he tries to seek answers, and he gets blown to atoms by whom we believe to be Dr. Manhattan. Okay, so back to Perpetua's throne room. Perpetua replies, "The multiverse has a way of healing itself, fortifying into what it believes to be the right shape." So according to Perpetua, Earth 3 basically resetted itself because, well, the universe demanded it. There must always be an evil version of the Justice League. Well, in this case, the crime syndicate. Okay, back to the video. Ultraman basically kidnaps Jon Kent Superboy and imprisons him in the center of a volcano for years. On this Earth, everything is reversed, so Ultraman draws his strength from consuming kryptonite. The sun depowers him, but luckily, the sun is weak, which means Jon cannot draw his powers and he is literally stuck in this prison. Ultraman sometimes uses Jon as a punching bag, sometimes as a person to cry to, and other times he just sat there and talked, retelling his stories, and each time he retells it, something changes, so his stories cannot be trusted. Eventually, Jon Kent musters enough energy to escape the volcano prison, but at the cost of injuring himself. It took a while, but he healed, only to go back to this world's version of the Hall of Justice in seek of a tech that can take him home. Superwoman arrives, who in this world is an evil version of Lois Lane, but Jor-El arrives shortly after, looking like hell ran over. Jor-El manages to save Jon Kent and takes him out of this universe. Who knew Jor-El's ship could travel through multiverses? Now, after returning to the ship, Jor-El explodes on Jon, stating that he spent years looking for his grandson. He went through hell and made deals to find Jon. Jor-El couldn't go back to Earth without the boy he promised to protect, hinting that Jor-El has a moral compass. This is when we see Jor-El gift Jon Kent the Superboy suit he wears today, but shortly after, Rogal Zaar attacks the ship. Jor-El sends Jon Kent back to Earth right before Rogal Zaar had a chance to lay his hands on Superman's son. Now that you know Jon Kent's complicated relationship with his grandfather, you need to know how Rogal Zaar, the guy that destroyed Krypton, is involved. We haven't even had a chance to get into how he joins the Legion of Superheroes. Okay guys, time to share your nerd rage. Brian Michael Bendis, what irked you the most about Bendis' current Superman run? Aging Jon Kent up to his teenhood, or having Superman publicly reveal his identity to the world? Let me know in the comments below, and of course this video was made possible by requests from our Patreon members. If you want to support the channel and have your ideas heard, check out our Patreon page for exclusive ad-free content and a bunch of more stuff that I cannot go in because I gotta bounce. And of course you can watch more right now. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time in another Comic Island video.